The basic outline for this project is going to start on page 273 of your notebook. In addition to this, you should have gone online to the Moodle page and download the appropriate folder with all the resources associated with this project. Now, we will be doing a few things different from what's outlined in the book, so hopefully in this video I'll be able to point out what's different and how to properly set up your project for this unit. All right, let's jump into Adobe Animate and let's get started. The first thing we want to do is to set up our document. If you've got character animations selected, you can choose Full HD, or you can go to the height and width and type in 1920 by 1080 as your dimensions. As far as the frame rate goes, we're going to set this to be 24 frames per second and make sure ActionScript 3 is the platform type. We'll say Create. Give it a second to load. Again, once you create your new document, let's go over to our zoom and let's make sure we can show the entire frame so we can see everything on our stage. The first thing we want to do is to draw off our sketch for our head. And so let's import that sketch to our working stage. We'll go up to File, down to Import, and let's import it to the stage. With that, it's going to prompt you to find your file. I've got mine inside of my Project 1 file resources, and here's the cartoon head JPEG. Do make sure that you've enabled all of the files in case you can't select that particular file. When you say open, it's going to place it in the middle of your document. If you do need to scale it up and down at this time, this is when you can select it and choose your free transform tool to make it larger or smaller, but mine seems to fit really well. Now, since this is going to be a sketch that we draw on top of, let's go to our timeline layer, double click the name of layer 1. We're going to call this the sketch layer. We can also either two-finger or control click on it, and we can turn this into a guide layer. This way it won't accidentally have it as a animated type layer. The final thing we'll do in our timeline is to lock down the sketch layer. Let's create a new one on top of this, our layer 2, and we're going to call this the head layer. Everything that we draw for the head will start off on this particular layer. To draw the first parts of the head, we're going to select our oval tool. The oval tool is towards the middle of your toolbox, and with it selected, open up your Properties panel. The first thing we want to do is to change up our stroke and fill color. Set your stroke color to be none by clicking on the little white box with a red line going through it. And let's set our fill color to be kind of a middle orange. Also, and this is very important, make sure object drawing mode is checked on for now. We don't have to worry about the stroke or anything else. Now we can start to click and drag our ovals. Now when I draw off his head, I'm just going to approximate the size of it. I'll click and drag. And if yours is off by a little bit, totally fine. Once you let go of it, you can always use your free transform tool to select the oval and then drag it into place by making it larger or smaller and placing it right where it needs to be. The other thing you can do in order to adjust the shape of it is to select your oval tool again. And if you hold down the Command key, notice how you can hover over the edge of it and your cursor turns into a little curved line. This will allow you to curve the edges of that particular line. In this case, I'll let it go down here, and you can even bring down the chin a little bit more. One thing to keep in mind is your drawing does not have to look perfect as the drawing that we have to work on. If it's off by a little bit, that's okay, as long as you get the basic feel for the placement of all of these shapes. Let's do the same thing for the ears. I've got my oval tool. For this ear, I'm going to click and drag to create an oval. And I can hold down my Command key as I click on this edge, and I can drag it in. You can see how this ear is going to be off by just a little bit, but that's okay. You can keep working with it until you get it as close as you want with that drawing. Same thing for this side. Click and drag. Hold down the Command key, and then you can bring it in and hold the Command key until you bring that edge back out there. And then finally, let's draw in for the chin. Click and drag down here, hold down the Command key and drag up. Here you can see it's a little bit difficult to figure out where things are, especially since we can't see the drawing that's underneath. So let me show you a trick that the book is outlining on how you can see both your outlines and the drawing that's underneath. We're going to go back up to our timeline with all the layers, and I'm going to command click or right click on the head layer, and at the very bottom open up the properties for that layer. One of the properties that you can do is view this layer in outline mode. You can also change the color of those outlines. When I say OK, here you can see nothing is filled in, but I can see the outlines of my layer. To make it a little bit easier to see those outlines, let's also go back up to our timeline and then control click on the sketch. And let's open up the sketch layer properties as well. From this one, you can make the visibility of it to be semi-transparent. In this case, 50% transparent. If we set OK, notice this will drop down the transparency of it and make the outlines a little bit easier to see. I like doing this because now I can see things like the chin and I can line them up wherever appropriate. So if I need to, I can select the chin and drag it up and put it into place right where it needs to be. Let's grab the oval tool and we'll place it right there. So again, turning on the outline and the transparency is done by command or control clicking up here and open up the properties. Then if you need to go back to normal mode, you can uncheck the outline view and it will bring it back to normal view like this as well. To draw the hair, let's go to our toolbox and locate the rectangle tool. And in our properties panel, let's set our fill color to be kind of a medium brown and still make sure object drawing mode is checked on. We're going to draw a rectangle going right across the middle of his face, right where the eye line would be. And then we're going to use our command and option keys to round it off to the top of his head. Remember, if you hold down the command key, you can click on any edge and you can round it up. So I'm going to do that to the top edge right up here. Let's hold down command and do it to the bottom edge as well. Now if you hold down command and option, you can click on the corners and be able to move those around and place them exactly where you want them to go. Let's do the same thing over here. We'll flatten this down. These should almost be parallel, so maybe something like this. Also, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down command and option and click right about here to drag in, and this will give me his sideburns. And I think these sideburns look a little bit better than what the book had created. So something like that. Again, hold down command and option and click in. That will curve that point there. And then I can hold down command and option to move those points. To make the little widow's peak in the center here, hold down command and option as you drag down, and that will curve that off as well. Now that we got the hair done and we used the rectangle to do that, let's focus in on creating some of the facial features. Let's go up to our timeline and create a new layer on top of the head layer. We'll rename this layer the face layer. And I need to see my sketch layer. So on the head layer, for now, I'm going to turn off the visibility of it so I can see the sketch that's underneath it. Everything that we're going to draw for this is going to be inside of the face layer. So make sure that one is what's selected. Now for this next part, we're on page 277 of your book. The book is going to assume that you have a drawing tablet to draw off these different facial features. But if you don't have a drawing tablet, let me show you what tool you can use in order to still complete this particular unit. Have a look at the middle of your toolbox, and you'll notice there's two different kinds of brush tools. If you're using a digital tablet, go ahead and use the regular brush tool. It's the one with the keyboard shortcut B, and it looks like a regular brush. But if you're like me and you don't have a digital tablet selected, I want you to use the paint brush tool. The keyboard shortcut is Y, and you'll notice it's got like a little extra tail of paint coming off of it. So moving along with this, I'm going to select the paintbrush tool, go over to my properties panel. Inside of my properties panel, I'm going to make sure my stroke color is set to a solid black, which it is here. We won't worry about a fill color, so you won't be able to change that because we're only painting strokes. Make sure Object Draw mode is on, and I'm going to recommend working with a stroke point of 18 points. Finally, the kind of profile that we're working with can be set to width, and we're going to choose this width profile number 1 that has it tapered on both edges. Now with this tool, when I click and drag, it'll create lines that look like this, and I can draw those on top of my, my face that I have. Let's do the nose first. I'm going to zoom into that area and click and drag and trace it off as best as possible. Now if you do make a mistake, you can always select it and delete it away, or Command Z to undo it. But keep going until you get the nose shape that you like. Remember, if you've got Object Drawing mode on, that one line that you create is the only one that you can do within one click. If you do have an object that takes more than one line, like let's look at the mouth. This mouth is made up of 1, 2, and 3 different lines. We need to do a special trick that the book outlines. To do this, I'm just going to draw a simple squiggle. Doesn't really matter what it looks like. Then hold down your Command key and double click on that squiggle. Whenever you double click, this is going to take you into drawing object mode, and this actually isolates just this particular little object. This means I can select all of it and delete it away, and notice that it doesn't affect anything else. Once we're inside of this mode, let's go over to our Properties panel and turn off Object Drawing mode, because what we want to do is we want to be able to draw 3 separate lines and have them all within the same container. Here's what I mean. So we'll start off, I'll draw a little top corner here, then I'll click and drag and draw this line. See if I can do it again a little bit better. Meh. Maybe for this I'll change up the profile to be this tapered one here. Now when I click and drag, it'll taper all the way down. That looks much better. And let's do the same for his bottom lip. Notice that I drew 3 different lines, but when I click on Scene 1, this will take me back into normal mode, and you can see I've got a bounding box going around all 3 of those. In other words, it's treating the mouth as if it's one object. That's because we double-clicked on it to go into that isolated drawing mode. Now for the eyelid, let's do something special. I'm going to click and drag and draw off one of the lids, and I want to have the upper part of the lid be filled in with a different color that's rounded off. Here's how we're going to do that. I'm going to hold down Command and double click on that line to go into Drawing Object mode. Again, while we're in here, we're going to turn off Object Drawing mode, and I'm going to set my stroke to be 1 point for now. With that, I can grab my Line tool and go up to View, down to Snapping, and make sure Snap to Object is checked on. You want to make sure it's checked for this to work really well. With that done, we're going to draw another line that connects this edge to this edge. And I find that if I click here and drag up, and then click here and drag over, it goes a little bit easier. Then I can hold down Command and I can round it off on either side. If necessary, I can hold down Command and Object and also drag that point in to get exactly what I need. And that looks pretty good right there. This line will be a little bit difficult to see, but it is there. Now we can fill in this inner portion of it. To fill it in, grab your Paint Bucket tool, go over to your Properties panel, and let's choose that orange skin color that we used before. When you click on the inside of it, notice how it automatically fills in the rest of that area. To get rid of the black outline that's on top of it, we can use our black arrow selection tool and carefully click right on the line and delete it away. This will give us our bottom edge with the top filled in looking nice. Let's do the same thing on this side as well. I'm going to go back to Scene 1, grab my paintbrush tool, and do make sure you've got Drawing Object mode turned on. If you don't see it, you can also click down here to activate that and turn it on. We'll return to this side, click down and draw across. Uh-oh, I didn't change my line weight. So let's also go over to our Properties panel, make sure 18 point is selected. That looks good. Now, oops, One more time. Haha. 18 point. There it is. Object drawing mode turned on. Now when I click and drag, it'll give me that. Again, we can hold down the Command key and double click on that line. This will take us into drawing object mode. We'll turn that off. We'll change our line width to be 1 point stroke. Grab your line tool, and then I can click on this edge down here and drag up, and then click again and connect it to here. Hold down the Command key as you click and drag, and that will round off these portions. And if you need to, you can click on this central part here and let that be rounded too. To fill this in, we'll grab our paint bucket tool. I've already got the orange loaded up, so all I gotta do is click in the center. And then finally, to get rid of that top line, we'll hold down the Command key and carefully click on the edge and delete it away. Finally, we can click on Scene 1 to return back to our scene in regular drawing mode to work with that. To do the pupils of the eyes, select your oval tool. With that selected, we'll go down to our colors, set your stroke color to be none, and we'll set our fill color to be a solid black. Also, make sure object drawing mode is turned on. We can zoom into the eyes and click and drag. When you hold shift, that'll give you your perfect circle. If you hold down the Command key, you can select one of the pupils, and if necessary, use your arrow keys to nudge it into place. Holding down both Option and Command when you click and drag will copy that pupil and give you one that's the exact same size. I'm also going to hold down Command and deselect that pupil for this next part. We want to change our fill color from black to be a solid white. We still have our oval tool selected. Now let's click and drag on top of this to create a simple white of the pupil. Again, you can hold down the Command key to click and drag to make it a little less off than a perfect circle, and then hold down Option and Command to click and drag to the other side of your eye, using the arrow keys to nudge into place as necessary. Finally, to put these behind everything, choose your black arrow selection tool, hold down the Shift key to select both of the whites of the eyes, then you can do Command and the down arrow and keep pressing down until it goes behind all of the eye. Then you can deselect by clicking off anywhere on the stage. Next thing we'll do is the eyebrows. Again, grab your paintbrush tool, make sure your stroke color is a solid black, and also make sure your stroke is set to be an 18 point width and your drawing mode is still set to be on. We'll click and drag, create one, and then click and drag to create a second one. That looks good for that. The final thing we need to create are the little extra tufts of hair up at the very top. To do this, we're going to use the pen tool. Pen tool is located at the top of your toolbox, looks like a regular writing pen. With that selected, we can go over to our Properties panel, and let's set the stroke this time to be about 5 points. We're also going to change the width profile, instead of having a tapered edge, back to a uniform edge. Next, we want to be able to see the little hairline that we created earlier. So I'm going to go up to our timeline. I'm going to turn on visibility for the head layer, but I'm also going to lock it down so I don't accidentally move anything. So I should be able to see where those hairs are. To draw the two little tufts, I'm going to click once there in the middle, then click down and back up, and then back to the original starting point, essentially making a little triangle. From here, I can grab my regular black arrow selection tool, and I can click on these edges and drag them inward. Notice that you don't have to hold down the Command key in order to do that, since we've already got the selection tool selected. Also, when I click on it to select it, let's fill it in with a hair color. I could choose the original hair color that we have. That looks good right there. Let's draw another tuft. It's going to be slightly lighter. Again, grab your pen tool. In the Properties panel, we already have everything set up. Let's create a second little tuft off to this side. So we'll click once, then click down. We'll let it overlap this one and then back over to here. In order to curve these edges, click the black arrow selection tool, and click on the central parts and drag them inward. You can even curve up that part. I'm going to click once to select it so I can see the blue outline around it. And then finally, let's choose a different, slightly lighter version of the brown, maybe something like that. Now I want this one to be behind this one, so I'm going to hold down Command and press the down arrow until it's placed behind that. The next part is we're going to add some accessories to this, such as the little hat on top of his head and a little Band-Aid off to the side. But while I've got this pulled up, if you need to make any adjustments, now's the time to do that. For instance, I can see one of these eyes is slightly larger or needs to be bigger to cover up the white of the pupil. So I'm going to select this upper portion of the lid, grab my free transform tool, and I'm going to drag it out just a little bit wider so that it covers up the entire edge. Let's do the same for this one, and we'll make it just a little bit bigger, maybe nudge it over into place. If you need to make things smaller or adjust the placement, now's the time to do that. Or if you need to redraw something, remember you can double click on it to enter into object drawing mode and then be able to redraw it from there. If you're following along with the book, we're now on page 282 of the textbook, talking about part 3 on making the accessories. To get started with this, let's go back up to our timeline and create a new layer, and I'm just going to call this ACC, which is abbreviation for accessories that the book is using. Also, I'm going to turn off visibility for my face and for the head so that only we see the sketch underneath. The two accessories we're going to create are the little Band-Aid and his hat that's on top of this. Let's do the Band-Aid first. We'll zoom in so I can bring up the Band-Aid a little bit closer. And since this is kind of rectangular, we're going to use the rectangle tool. With it selected, look over in your properties panel. One of the things you can do with a rectangle is curve the edges or the corners of your rectangle. So I'm going to type in about 15 pixels. And while I've got this pulled up as well, we're going to set the stroke to be none and the fill color to be a light, almost yellowish orange. It's actually kind of a flesh tone. With that done, you can click and drag, and you can see now we have a rounded rectangle. Go ahead and just eyeball off a good height and width to it. If yours is off by a little bit, that's okay. From here, we can select it, move it into place, and also with it still selected, we can double click, and this will go into drawing object mode. I'm going to click on it one more time to select the object, and let's choose our free transform tool. This will allow us to rotate it to match the rotation of it, and again we can move it into place. Be careful not to deselect it at this time, because next thing we want to do is we want to be able to curve the Band-Aid so that it looks like it matches the curvature of his chin. Now to do this, look at the very, very bottom of your toolbox. You've got a different set of different kinds of distortions you can make. There's everything from rotation and skewing, scaling. You can do a free distort. What we want to choose is this very last one to do an envelope distort. With envelope distort, check out the selection that we have now. You've got a variety of little extra dots going along the edges. We're going to click on these innermost points and drag in, and you can see how that automatically adds a little bit of a curve to it. So we'll drag it in just a bit, do the same thing for the other side too. And I like to click on these Bezier curves to match that particular curve this way. Again, if yours is off by a little bit, that's okay. The main thing is we're getting a envelope distortion of that particular area. We can now deselect it to lock in that transformation. And finally, let's return to scene 1, and let's zoom back out so we can see his hat. I'll do show all on the frame. Let's do the same thing now for the hat. I'm going to go back up to my timeline. I do want to be able to see my face and the head, so we'll turn on visibility for this so I can also see the little hairline and where everything is at. We'll go and grab our rectangle tool, And with rectangle selected, we'll go back over to our properties. Let's give it a stroke that's going to be black and about 5 points in width. And we'll set our rectangle options down here to be just a small roundedness, so about 3 to 5 is okay. From here we can click and drag. I didn't set a fill color for it. Let's do that as well. So we'll select that, set the fill color to be kind of a dark or a medium dark red. That looks good. Now let's click and drag, and we'll create that. As with the other one, we can either do an envelope distortion or we can do our holding down Control and clicking and dragging. Whatever method works best for you. Let's do an envelope distortion. I'm going to select my object and then choose the Free Transform tool. At the very bottom, we'll do an envelope selected. With envelope, we can click on this top portion and drag it upwards to match that. Same way for down here. And again, I like to choose the little Béziers on the inside to have it match. You can play around with the shape of yours if you want to do something a little bit different. Let's do the same. Get these middle points and drag those outward. When we deselect it, you can see this is what we have left over. Finally, let's do a rounded one up here at the top. For that one, I'm just going to choose my regular oval tool and then click and drag to match the oval. Hold down the Command key and I'll distort it until it matches where I want it to be. And remember, since this one's on top of this, we'll choose our Selection tool, hold down the Command key and press down until it goes to the very back. Finally, if I need to make any final transformations, this is where I can use my quick Free Transform tool to make it taller or wider, and use my arrow keys to nudge it into place. Now that we've got all of this done, this is a good time to go through each of the different levels. You can unlock all of your layers and make any adjustments and tweaks before moving on to the next step of adding the texture to our final design. To add some texture to our cap, let's import it to our stage first. We'll go up to File, down to Import, and choose Import to Stage. Then you can choose the Texture JPEG and say Open. And this will put the picture right in the center of our stage, and we can just drag it off to the side for now. In order to use this, let's select the bottom portion of his cap. With that selected, go over to your Properties panel and check out the fill color. At the very bottom, you'll see a little image of that texture that was imported. So when you select it, you can see now that texture is placed inside of there. Let's do the same thing for the top portion of the cap. So with it selected, go to your fill color and then choose the very bottom portion as well. Now you can see how Animate treats the two different textures. It's going to scale them to appropriately fit the actual size. If you want to further refine and adjust the look and feel of these images, select the portion that you want to affect. In my case, this bottom portion here, and locate the Gradient tool. Now this is located underneath your Free Transform tool, and the keyboard shortcut is F. But with the Gradient Transform tool, this allows you to click on the area. You can see you get a little bounding box around this, and you can either click on the edges to scale it in, or you can scale it from one side or the other. You can even click the top, and you can shear it if you need to. And you can click outside of it and rotate it. So whatever fits best for your design. When you're done, all you have to do is click to deselect it. Let's do the same for this top one. Select the top portion. I want to scale mine in so that it kind of matches that. Maybe I'll stretch it out just a little bit more. And then once I get what I like, there's that too. Now we want to bring back some of the red coloring onto our cap again. One thing that Animate doesn't do is allow you to lower the opacity of a picture that's placed inside of it. But what we can do is put a low opacity color on top of that. Here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to choose my Selection tool and hold down Shift as I select both the top and bottom portion of my cap. With both of those selected, let's turn this into a symbol. So we'll go to Modify and choose Create Symbol or Convert to Symbol. I'm going to call this the hat symbol. We'll keep it a graphic with a center registration, and we'll say OK to that. Now that it's a hat, it's going to be treated as one solid object. And if you look over in your Properties panel, symbols that you've created allow you to add color effects to them. And in our case, we can choose the style of adding a tint to it. And you can see how it'll overlay a solid color of that to whatever color is selected. In this case, it's kind of a medium teal blue. So let's select the red cap color that we had before, and we'll lower the tint down to about 70 to 80%, something where we can still see the texture, but it still shows up as a little bit of red. So I'd think about 70 to 80 is good for that. You can adjust the color of it from here as well, but that's how we can bring back the color into the hat at the top. Now let's work on the bandage. I'm going to zoom in so I can see it a little bit better. Select your bandage, and just like with the hat, let's convert it to a symbol as well. So we'll go to Modify and Convert to Symbol, and I'll call this the bandage. And say OK. To add a little bit of texture to either side of it, let's double click on it. This will take us into the bandage isolation mode. And since we drew this using drawing mode on, we want to be able to break it apart so that we can split this object into different parts. So with it selected, you can go up to Modify and choose Break Apart. Notice Command B is the keyboard shortcut. And this will turn it into just a regular drawn object. With that done, now the book kind of has some really interesting way of doing this. Let me show you a better way. I'm going to grab my line segment tool, and I'm going to draw two parallel lines going across it. We're going to divide this up into 3 sections. We want the bandage to have some texture on these 2 outer sections. So I'm going to use my selection tool to select one edge, go over to my fill color, and let's choose that bandage or that little texture that we have. Remember, to scale this down, you can choose your gradient transform tool. It may require you to back out so that you can see the whole edge just like this. And I'm going to scale down that particular texture. You can then click away to deselect it. Now let's select this other bottom portion. Choose your black arrow selection tool, click on that part, go up to your fill color and fill it in with that texture. And to scale the texture down, choose your gradient selection tool or transform tool, and we can scale down that part as well too. Now that we got the 2 different textures done, I'll zoom back in. You can use your black arrow selection tool, carefully click just on the black line and hit delete to erase it away. The book would have you create several different layers and break this apart, and to be honest, that's a little bit overkill for what we need to do for this. Now that we're done with this, we can go out of the isolation mode by clicking on Scene 1. And to recolorize this, select your little bandage object, go over to the color effect in your Properties panel. Let's choose the tint. And again, choose the same color that we used for the bandage, this kind of middle tone. And we can drop down the percentage of the tint until we start to see the texture underneath. Again, between 70 and 80% works best. From here I can zoom back out. Let's set a show to the frame. We can then select our big texture swatch and delete it away altogether. The final thing we want to do is to add a simple gradient color to our nose. With our black arrow selection tool, I'm going to zoom in on my nose and select it, then double click to enter into drawing object mode. Just like we did with the eyelids, we want to be able to isolate out this central portion. So again, let's grab our line tool, go over to your Properties panel and make sure your line color is something that's dark. So I chose a black or a middle gray, and the stroke can be relatively small, about 1 point. Carefully click on one edge of the nose and then drag to the other top edge right there. From here, we can fill in this particular area. Now I'm going to choose my paint bucket tool, and as far as the fill color goes, rather than using the predefined fill color swatch, we're going to click on the color panel. The color panel is located at the very top, and if you don't see it, you can always go to Window and find Color right here. Select your Fill Bucket color swatch, and by default you can see it's a solid color. We're going to choose a radial gradient. With the radial gradient, you can see how you can choose 2 or 3 different color swatches. If you double click on any one of these swatches, this will bring up the color, and you can choose whatever color you want it to be. In our case, let's let the first color swatch be the same as the rest of our skin tone. The second color swatch can get a little bit darker, and I'm even going to make mine slightly more red. And then finally, if you've got a third color swatch, it can be slightly darker still, maybe even a little bit more red, something like this. Now when I click on the inside of this, you can see how it fills it in, and it doesn't quite look right. Here's the reason why. I'm going to zoom back out so I can see the entire thing. Actually, I'm going to choose Fit to Frame. Then we can choose our Gradient Transform tool. With this, you can see how the default gradient in my case was set all the way up here to this top corner for some reason. I'm going to click on it and drag it down here to the bottom, and you can see as I move my gradient, it'll move this around as well. Now in this case, it's really, really big, so we need to click on some of these outer edges in order to either rotate it or to scale it in. Let's see if we can click here and scale in. This will scale in our gradient. This one here, we'll scale it down all together. And I can click on the center portion, and let's see if we can rotate it to where it needs to go. Now it's starting to look a little bit better. I'm going to place this up towards the top and give it something a little more like this. I think that looks much, much better. Finally, I can deselect it. Choose your black arrow selection tool. Again, I'm going to zoom in. Carefully click on the line and delete the line away. I can then double click and return back to scene 1, and let's save this and show all frame. Now is a good time to save up your document. So if you haven't already, you can go to File and Save or Save As, and you can give your document name the cartoon head and keep it as the Animate Flash file. When you say save, this will save it onto your desktop or into your folder that you've been working on. In the second half of this project, we're going to convert everything to the appropriate symbols, and then we're going to animate this head by moving it left to right, up and down, as if its eyes were looking around.